Breaking the Silence is a podcast that dives into the intricate and often challenging topics of grief and loss within relationships. Through insightful discussions, the podcast aims to explore how pain can be transformed into purpose, leading to healing and growth. By addressing themes such as inner child work and the journey towards feeling alive once more, this podcast offers a beacon of hope for those navigating difficult emotions. Ultimately, Breaking the Silence aims to guide listeners towards moving forward and embracing all the blessings that life has in store as they embark on a journey of self-discovery and spiritual fulfillment. I'm your guide through this journey, Raynea Wallace, and I invite you to join me as we break the silence surrounding grief and loss, transforming pain into purpose and finding hope in the healing power of storytelling. Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome to Breaking the Silence. I am your host, Raynea Wallace, and I am so glad that you are here with me today. So first, get you a warm beverage or whatever it is for you. Get comfortable, cozy up. This is just friends chatting, friends sharing our journeys with each other and connecting. So the pre-launch is out. The recording of this is actually Brian's 5-year anniversary as I'm recording this. So I thought a really good place to start now, you sort of know from the pre-launch, like what I envision for this podcast. And so I feel like a good place to start now is just for you to maybe get to know me a little bit better and know the people in my life, know what brought me to this point here. So, oh my goodness, let's see. Some things about me. I grew up in Galloway, Ohio. I actually was raised by my grandparents. My birth mom had left my older sister and myself with my grandparents, and they raised us. They actually ended up even adopting us. And although I believe, I'm going to stop there for a minute and say that anything I share in my journey is never intended to hurt anyone or anything like that. It is my story, my truth, and the road I've walked, and it's brought me to where I am today. And so that's why I feel like it is important for you to know some of the background. So although I know everybody loved me to the best of their abilities, it was not necessarily the healthiest environment. There was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of chaos, a lot of inconsistency, and I share all that from a place of that just, again, created who I am, and that led me to this point in life. So anyways, I was raised by my grandparents. Like I said, they adopted me. They actually ended up adopting my older sister and myself. And then, so there was 3 girls from my birth mom. The younger one of the 3 of us, my birth mom actually raised. So we didn't grow up together. We still had contact and seen each other. It was sort of interesting dynamics of that, like I considered my grandparents my mom and dad. That's what I knew my whole life. And yet your birth mom is still, around, and the whole thing of how, like your aunt now by birth, your aunt now from adoption becomes your sister. So anyways, just really interesting dynamics there. that was sort of challenging, I think, as a child to navigate and know how to handle that, because you feel like you are the only one dealing with that, right? At least for me back then, I remember like that was not something I wanted people to know, that my grandparents raised me. And oh my goodness, if I only knew, like by the time I was in high school, like I feel like it was probably my senior year, I connected with someone else that she was being raised by her parents. And then I realized how common it was. But back then I didn't know. And so isn't that interesting that the things that we think we're so alone in, we aren't? Like, and that again, this and just speaking, if we just speak about things and we're vulnerable, we find out we aren't alone. Like, all that stuff, all that time when I was younger, it was way more common than I realized. And we do this even as adults, that we think we are the only ones struggling with whatever. We're the only ones dealing with it. And we keep quiet and we keep it in and we don't talk about it. And if we would find, wow, there's so many others out there that are dealing with the same thing or struggling with the same thing, and we can support each other. So I sort of went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But so anyways, grew up. I actually got married right out of high school. Graduated like June 7th and was married June 17th. I had my first daughter the following January. So my first baby, which is my oldest, Brittany, and that marriage did not last long. Unfortunately, I know back then I just did not realize what the magnitude of what marriage meant, like what those vows really meant. And I didn't know Jesus back then. So although I believed in I believed in God, I should say. I believed there was a God. I didn't know anything about a relationship with Jesus. I hadn't, accepted Jesus as my Savior. I didn't know what marriage looked like through God's eyes, is what I should say. So anyways, by the time that marriage lasted, I think it did not last long. I think maybe a year and a half. By the time Brittany was 10 months old, I believe we were divorced. And so I went on to work at Sears Fashion Center, and that is where I met Dave. And he actually was he loaded the trucks for the warehouse. And I counted the merchandise that went on the trucks, and he loaded it. And so there was two loaders, him and another guy, and I worked with the lady there. She was training me. And so I was working with Dave all day long. And anyways, he pulled off, like he stood there one day pulling off Post-its, trying to get my phone number. I kept throwing them in the trash. And I was like, I'm not giving you my phone number. And I finally did after a while. And anyways, the rest is history. We ended up dating. We got married in February 13th of 1993. Went on to have two children of our own. So at that point there was three. There was Brittany, Brandon, and Brady. Then, we were just living the dream. Back then, raising the three kids. And we had, at that point, we lived in Galloway, and then we moved, we sold that house. We moved to Grove City, Ohio, and bought a house there, and did a ton of work on that house, bought that up from I think that house went to like a sheriff's sale or something. And so Dave did a ton of work on that. We were there for about 5 years and decided we wanted to live out even further. So sold that and ended up out in a rural community, We're close to we're considered Mount Sterling, but we're close to Washington Courthouse, Ohio. And we've been here now almost 18 years. And funny story, I'll share this. Like when I found this house is like really old, like built in 1900s. Actually, we found when we were stripping the wallpaper off the walls because we were trying to restore it back to like original. We were stripping everything off the walls and all that. We found a drawing on the original plaster that said 1903. So I'm assuming the house was built, right around there because that was the original plaster. Nothing, wallpaper was over top of it then and stuff. So, anyways, we bought the house with the intention that I wanted to, host weddings here. I wanted it to be a wedding venue. So I thought, oh my gosh, it would be so beautiful. Restore this house, have weddings here. Across the street was the parking and everything and all that jazz. Anyways, God laughed at me. God has laughed at me several times, I must say, because it never ended up being a wedding venue. We actually ended up becoming foster parents, and this big, huge house was just the perfect place to have a large family. So we ended up fostering for 8 years. We adopted 5 children over those 8 years, and we even still have children that we didn't actually adopt, but they are adults now, and they are very much still a part of our family. They come for the holidays, they come to special events, just feel like my kids, So it was definitely, two things I'll say about that. One, God knew, like, no, you're not using that house for weddings. You're going to use it to love kids, which was so always in my heart anyways. Like I knew, like, again, from me being adopted and knowing all those feelings. And that's something we can talk about over time of like dealing with that loss and that you have to grieve of what your childhood was or wasn't, right? I knew that I wanted to walk other kids through that. I wanted to love them through that I could relate to them because I had experienced it. And then I totally lost my train of thought on the other thing. But it was just the most beautiful gift ever that we had the privilege of doing that. And I will say, that's the other thing God laughed at me about. So using the house for fostering. And then also, you sort of have this plan of how your life's going to go, right? The way you think it's supposed to go. And when we decided to foster and adopt, we said 2 things that we were not willing to do. And I'm just going to be real and transparent here. One was I said no to special needs. I did not feel like I was equipped to do special needs. I thought that had to be some really gifted, amazing people, and I did not think I was one of those. The other thing was no teenagers, and only because, goodness, like sometimes your own teenagers are a challenge, right? Like we love them, but some days it is hard. And so God totally laughed at me on both of those because we ended up with Bryant and we had no idea that he was special needs. And that was just God being so perfect in the way that he is, that all that they called me up, all we knew back then, and I'm going to get into Bryant's story, but I feel like that needs to be an episode probably all on its own. But all that we knew back then was that they had a newborn that needed a home. And I said, yes, absolutely. And so I went and picked him up on the 4th of July, as a matter of fact. And I'll share more about that. But he did end up with special needs. He ended up with a diagnosis that we found out was terminal later on. We had no idea for the first 2.5 years. And then we ended up with teenagers, and how that came to be was the agency had called me a couple times for placements. One time I was really sick and I was like, I can't. The other time, something else, I can't remember. It was a teen girl or something. And I mean, like right at my son's age. And I was like, that is not a good idea. And anyways, I just prayed and was like, Lord, I trust you with whoever they call next. I trust you with that. And I will be obedient to it. And so it was two boys at first, and one was exactly Brady's age, and the other one was a couple years younger. And I said yes, because I told the Lord, like, okay, I'm going to be obedient to whoever it is. And what a beautiful gift. And then we ended up, then their sister, which was, she was like 10 then, I believe, around there. Anyways, it ended up, they were like, hey, can you end up taking our sister too? So we ended up with the three siblings, and they've just been the most beautiful gift, really. Bryant was, they were, they still are. And it totally blew. And I'm not going to sit and tell you that there weren't challenges in all of it, with all the kids, anytime fostering, even with your own kids, there's challenges, right? But they blew every idea, every preconceived idea I had about teenagers or whatever, out of the water. They really did. They are good kids. And so they've just been a gift to our family, all of it. And fostering taught us so much. So from there, Bryant, like I said, we found out he had a terminal diagnosis. He did pass in February 21st of 2019. And then that really started to take me on a journey of, like, how do you come back from this? And again, I'll get way more into Bryant's story. But how do you? Like, really, like, how do you come back from loss? That's sort of where I was at then. It felt so dark, that I just was like, yeah, you don't know. You don't know how you'll make it through, but you just one step at a time. And then 2.5 years later, I guess technically almost 3 years later, because Bryant passed in February of 2019, Dave passed in November of 2021. So it was close to being almost 3 years apart. Dave and I both ended up with COVID, and he ended up in the hospital and passed 3 weeks later. Really just rocked our world. Like you just really can't believe, and I'll probably share more in his story too, but just how is this happening again? Without going into too much detail yet, I just remember the nurses calling me that night, and in my bedroom, before I went up to get my kids and tell them that we had to go, literally screaming and jumping up and down like, I don't want to do this again. And thinking, how am I doing this again? How am I going to plan another funeral? Not even 3 years later. And so from there, that really, I was stuck. I was in the place of afraid to move forward, not sure what to do, like trying to navigate it all of, I still had 4 kids. And that's one thing I didn't say. Oh my goodness. So I have 8 kids, and 4 of them are still at home. 1 is in heaven, obviously. And then we have our bonus ones that we love so much. But anyways, just really stuck in that place of really just being afraid to move forward, afraid that if I did anything, it would all fall apart. And I knew that I had to step forward, and not even that I had to, that I wanted to. I wanted to step into all that God had for me. I wanted to be fully alive again. I wanted to have peace and joy and healing and love and connection and all those things. And so I knew that I had to heal. And that's where the 180 method came in. And I joined, and I'll share more about this. I joined a mastermind, which was such a God thing in itself. And then from there, I ended up in the 180 method. And there was so much healing there and so many aha moments, which I will for sure go into, because I think that is the key for you. If you want healing and you want to feel alive and have joy and peace and, fun again, and just all those things, that it comes from truly healing the wounds from way back in childhood, whenever, and we'll talk way more about that. But anyways, that is really what brought me to this point. So after I went through the 180 method, things just really started shifting in that I knew that I wanted to help others, navigate their healing journey. And so I decided to become a certified life coach in the 180 method, and specifically helping people with loss of relationships, whatever that may be, or loss of, and I talked about that in the pre-launch, loss of even the dream, or loss of what you thought life was going to be, but loss of relationship, whether it's through death or divorce. And so that is basically how I got to the point of this podcast. It was the next level of moving forward in everything that God has for me. So I'm so glad that you are here with me. That is basically, in a nutshell, a little bit about me. So until next time, I send you off with so much love. And again, I'm so thankful that you are here on this journey with me. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Breaking the Silence. As we conclude our time together, let us carry forward the stories we've heard, the emotions we've shared, and the connections we've forged. Remember, the journey through grief and loss is not one we walk alone. In the silence, we find solidarity. In our shared experiences, we find strength. And in our vulnerability, we find resilience. If you or someone you know is navigating the complexities of grief, know that there is support available. Reach out, lean on your community, and remember that healing is not linear. It is a journey, and you are not alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being a part of this transformative conversation. Until next time, may you find peace in the spaces between the silence. Please be sure to subscribe below and leave us a review. If you'd like to connect further, you can find me on Instagram at Coaching with Raynea.